Welcome to The Real Story with Jeanne Ives. This is my podcast where I put policy experts in front of you so you can listen from them instead of a ministry of disinformation like Biden would like to put in. You're going to get the real story on real policies from real people who deal with this every day. Today on my podcast, I have with me the president of Heartland Institute, James Taylor. We'll get to him in a moment, but I want to also just come back to and remind you that we have a big event May 13th. It's at the Abington in Glen Ellen. We are nearly sold out, so if you still want a ticket, go to breakthrough-ideas.com. We're very thrilled to have some corporate sponsors for that. One of them is Net Motors, and you can go to netmotors.com. These guys make car buying so easy. On-the-spot financing, all major banks in-house on funding deals, everything inside a climate-controlled 30,000 square foot indoor showroom, tons of sports cars, convertibles, SUVs, your one-stop shopping experience. Ask for Michael Colby, the general manager of Net Motor Cars, and he will personally take care of you. We are also sponsored for that event by Kai's Restaurant. Hopefully you remember them. They're the ones who, during the shutdown and the lockdown, had the audacity to put up a sign on their marquee saying, "We are Americans. We are free and open." They defied Governor Pritzker, and for that, they got a lot of freedom fighters going there. But you can enjoy Kai's Restaurant at 705 North Avenue in Glendale Heights. They are a trailblazing restaurant, like I said. They're the home of the best steak and seafood in Glendale Heights. From certified hand-cut black Angus steaks to fresh seafood delivered daily, Kai's is committed to serving nothing but the best to their customers with an award-winning, Zagat-rated executive chef. So we encourage you to patronize both those, Net Motor Cars and Kai's Restaurant. Now, getting back to the topic of the day, I have with me James Taylor, and he is the president of Heartland Institute, and I have been very fortunate to know James for quite a few years. And when we first got together, James, we were talking about climate issues. And this is probably going back about 8 years when I first became a state representative. You live nearby, but now you are the president of Heartland Institute. It has worldwide significance. It takes on a number of different policies. One of them is this whole energy and environment discussion. And I brought you in today to have this discussion as we have recognized exactly what Governor Pritzker, along with President Biden, is trying to do to the fossil fuel industry. And in the state of Illinois, that is not a good combination. While the majority of our electricity, well over 50%, is provided by nuclear power, in our southern and central part of our state, the majority of that power is actually provided by coal and natural gas. Those are particularly two fossil fuels that the Pritzker administration would like to shut down. And as I had noted on previous podcasts to my listeners, we know that in shutting that down, what Ameren has already announced is going to happen to central and southern Illinoisans is that they are going to experience price spikes like they've never seen before and rolling blackouts. What do you have to say about this?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the kind words, Jeanne. It's always good to see you, especially in person here on this podcast. But yes, this is an unforced error. This is a predictable consequence of policies that shut down our most affordable, abundant energy sources. And I know that in Illinois, the mix for electricity is a little different here in the northern part of the state than the southern part. But as a whole, Illinois gets 50% of its electricity generation from nuclear. It gets a quarter from coal. It gets another 12% from natural gas. So if we're going to shut down coal power by 2035, and if we're going to shut down natural gas power by 2045, as last year's electricity law requires, we're talking 37% of the state's electricity production being shut down, not because the plants are falling in disrepair, not because they can't produce energy anymore, simply because, as Governor Pritzker said, we want to fight a so-called climate crisis. This is a climate crisis that's caused being almost entirely by China. 75% of the emissions growth of carbon dioxide this century is caused by China alone. But here in Illinois, we are being forced to pay the price. We're shutting down perfectly good electricity generation plants. We have to build new ones at tremendous cost. And yes, the predictable result is we're going to have energy shortages and price hikes as we do this.
Well, and it's not going to take too long. So the legislation that passed last year and now the predicted rolling blackouts that are coming this year, aren't just because of that legislation. Let's be honest. It's been about a decade or so in the making. You know, the Biden administration has signaled that we don't like fossil fuels. The Pritzker administration doubled down on that. And even when you had Republican governance, you had a lot of Democrats saying, we're just going whole hog into the climate scareism. And so all of this has to be shut down. And then you've had weak Republicans, quite frankly, unwilling to stand up to them. And in fact, in the state of Illinois, you had a dozen or so Republicans actually vote for this fossil fuel shutdown in the state of Illinois. And so they say, well, you know, wind and solar is the answer. James, wind and solar is the answer? Is that what we're going to cover our productive farmland with in Illinois? And is it the answer? How do you replace 37% of your energy with wind and solar?
And there are so many aspects to that question when you say covering our productive farmland. Two professors at Harvard University who believe in a climate crisis, who want to replace conventional energy with wind and solar, they produced a peer-reviewed study. They examined how much of the nation's land would have to be covered with wind turbines to replace conventional energy production, conventional electricity production. What they found is that we would have to cover literally one-third of the nation's landmass with turbines to replace current electricity. And if we electrify vehicles, which is another priority of the Biden administration and Governor Pritzker, now we'd have to cover half of America's landmass with turbines. You talk about an environmental catastrophe. You talk about the mass destruction of wildlife and ecosystems. That's what we would be doing. That's just on the environmental side. Now, economically, what you're looking at is replacing abundant, affordable, reliable, on-demand electricity. If you're looking at nuclear power, coal, natural gas, you can deliver that as much as you need anytime you want. But wind and solar power, you don't. This is what California experienced when they had their rolling blackouts more than once, and they're going to have more of them. When you replace abundant, reliable electricity with whimsical electricity, that's what you get.
And so, you know, they virtue signal in the state houses, whether it's California or Illinois, saying, hey, we want renewable energy, we want clean energy. All of this is really kind of false. By the way, fossil fuels are renewable too. Let's just face it. And and wind and solar are not clean energy necessarily when you look at the entire production process and also the disposal process for the batteries, for the wind blades, for the solar panels. None of that is renewable. None of that can be used again. It all gets dumped into a landfill. And it takes a lot of industrial mining to actually get the rare earth metals needed to actually produce the windmills themselves or the solar panels. So none of this is necessarily clean. But the virtue signaling that goes on in these states is just unbelievable. So like you talk about with California with the rolling blackouts, at the same time that they're chatting about all this in committee hearings, on the flip side, they're realizing that they do have to produce power for their citizens, that this is an economic humanitarian crisis, quite frankly. If you can't run the pumps that run your sewer system, that run your water systems, then you have a sanitary problem in your entire structure. So what do? Well, they announced they're going to put in a new gas plant. Of course, they don't make headline news about it. They just quietly go about doing it. And then the other thing that came into play with their California rolling blackouts is they had to then get about 20% of their energy needs from coal plants outside of their state. I mean, who's getting who, James?
Right. Can you imagine how bad the blackouts would have been if they couldn't import coal power from other states?
That's right.
And when we have this widespread effort to make every state reliable on wind, relying on wind and solar power exclusively, this is going to be the case times 10 in every state, and there'll be no backup plan. There'll be no neighboring states. And by the way, again, if we're going to justify this insane policy on environmental issues, keep in mind that the rare earth elements that are necessary for wind turbines and solar panels, it's not like mining gold or copper or iron where you have deposits that are concentrated, where you can mine them responsibly and replace them afterwards. Rare earth elements are called that not because they're very rare, but because they don't run in veins or in clusters. So you have to excavate tremendous amounts of earth, soil, rock to pull out just a little bit of these rare earth elements. And then you have to separate the rare earth elements through an acid bleaching. It's one of the most toxic, environmentally destructive practices on the planet. That's why we only have one place in the United States where we mine for rare earth elements, because people won't tolerate it because it's so environmentally horrendous. So now what we're going to do is we're going to focus on wind turbines, solar panels that are about the most destructive practices on the planet. And moreover, the only places that will do this are China and other authoritarian governments that don't have to answer to the people. So now we're going to be dependent on our energy sources, primarily to China. Now, during the during the early days of COVID, China made it clear when they weren't happy with us that they would consider pulling necessary medications to deal with COVID if we didn't fall into line. If we criticize them too much, they'd pull it. What do you think they're going to do with our energy supply if we become reliant on China? The very same thing.
Well, I mean, that was great. I mean, thank you for waking people up who are listening to the realities of this. I mean, the externalities from any production of energy are there. Let's admit it. But the externalities that you're talking about, essentially, we're going to pretend like we've got clean energy while outsourcing all of the externalities to a foreign country who is going to make the world less well off when it comes to that.
Right.
And
right.
by the way, these mining equipment, I'm sure they're powered by electrical vehicles. Is that right? Yeah, like that's
I don't
a
think
joke.
so.
Right. They don't have the power to do it.
If we want what's best for the American economy, if we want what's best for American jobs, if we want what's best for the environment in America and around the world, the answer to all of those inquiries and all of those questions is domestic conventional energy production. Here in the United States, we produce coal, we produce natural gas, we produce oil in the most environmentally responsible manner on the planet. We're not going to be excavating rare earth elements at a tremendous environmental cost. We don't need to do that when we're producing conventional electricity through coal and natural gas and then our transportation through oil. This is where we need to stand up for the economy and, just as importantly, for the environment. Why are we waging a war on American jobs and American energy production when this is the best place to do it and it's the best means of safeguarding all aspects of our society?
Well, you asked me that question. I ask you, why? Why are we doing this? Now, I mean, let's turn to that, because another thing that Heartland Institute you have recently told me, is involved in is this whole ESG qualifier for corporations, which means that there's a an economic social governance component to them reporting on their corporate reports what's going on. Part of that is how well they do on climate stuff. Am I correct on that?
Right. So ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance scores.
Okay.
And basically what happens is you have the largest money lenders and the largest insurers that get together, and they have to do this together because if one company tries to do this, they're going to lose out on a lot of money because they're foregoing the most profitable and most economically beneficial enterprises. But what they do is they say, we are going to refuse to lend money to, refuse to insure companies that do not score well for environmental, social, and governance. So the environmental component, you need to be zero carbon or close to it. You need to be donating to the environmental causes or else you get a bad score. Social and governance scores. What does your board of directors look like? Do they have enough minorities on there? Are they the right minorities in the right positions? Are you, as a company, doing everything you can to promote woke culture? If not, then you can't get financing. And my problem with this, it'd be one thing if any individual company on their own said, hey, look, we believe in certain principles and this is how we're going to operate. Fine. But there are two components here. First of all is that they band together to make sure that nobody can defy the overall cartel. Because again, if Merrill Lynch decided that they weren't going to abide by this, they would clean up at the other's expense. They have to do this together or else the whole agenda will sink. But secondly, this isn't a question of saying, hey, we need to get involved with how corporations decide to run their businesses. No, this is corporations getting involved with how society is going to be governed. These are corporations trying to do an end run around the democratic process. It's up to the people through our elected representatives to determine how woke we're going to be in our laws and in our culture if the laws are going to apply there. It's up to the people through their elected representatives to determine environmental and energy policy. It's not up to some corporations that have nothing to do with the topic other than the fact that through their economic power of lending and insuring, they can bring other companies to their knees. And that's why we have to stand up and fight the ESG agenda.
Well, we need at least one big, massive finance company, one big, massive insurance company to say no. Hey, we're all takers. We're all takers. You don't want to comply with woke culture. You don't want to have somebody tell you who can sit on your board, who can't. You don't want to comply with nonsense on environmental stuff that John Kerry makes up and spouts off in Paris. You don't want to comply with that? Great. We're all takers, and let that happen as an investment strategy.
Right.
But I mean, you're right. If they don't work in concert, then they won't work at all. This whole plan won't work. Which brings us to another thing that Heartland's working on, and that's taking on big tech censorship. Now, I mean, obviously, it's pretty alarming when you had Director Mayorkas in hearings last week unveil the idea that they're going to have their own version of the 1984 Ministry of Truth. However, they're calling it the Disinformation Governance Board. I mean, what is that?
Yeah, and before we hit that, I think it's important to note for big tech, again, it's the same issue with ESG. It's not that they are working for their own economic interest and government should stay out of those types of decisions. It is that you have the big tech firms. 3 companies control 97% of social media traffic. They work together and they work with the government. But even
so it's at Twitter, Facebook, and
Pinterest.
Pinterest. Well, okay. All right.
So basically what happens is this. You have Facebook admitting that they're working with the Biden administration on what they should be flagging and censoring.
Absolutely.
The Biden administration admits that they work with Facebook. But even if they didn't, still, if you have 3 corporations that control free speech in this country in the primary venue by which people share ideas, that's social media. Listen, you can run your platform however you want to maximize profits, to beat out your competitors, etc. But you can't take that power to take away people's free speech rights. That's outside the free market realm that you are in. You can't accumulate power for the means of suppressing other people's rights. I, for example, cannot form a company with my 3 neighbors to go rob all the other houses in the neighborhood and then say, well, it's a free market property rights issue. No, I cannot take away other people's unalienable rights, nor can big tech take away our free speech rights. And the reason you see such hostility to Elon Musk buying Twitter is, as you mentioned, now that we have this Ministry of Truth, the Biden administration and the political left as a whole were counting on the fact that big tech, those 3 corporations working in concert with government, you could have effectively government censorship of speech because they're already working together. Now you have an official storyline from the Ministry of Truth. Here is what's acceptable. Here isn't what's acceptable. You had the 3 large corporations willingly, eagerly complying and effectuating that. Now, if you got one entity that breaks from it, then perhaps they cannot enforce their free speech mandates, but who knows? They'll have other ways to try to implement this.
I mean, we might as well be China had their agenda gotten through, and they were counting on their agenda getting through because nothing works for them if they can't sway people by controlling what they learn about a topic.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, and let's get back to that. That includes really the whole climate issue, the entire energy issue, all this discussion. If the truth really were to be told about energy, then we would go back to what works, which we have produced, which engineers have figured out how to do, from pipeline technology that is actually safer for deliverables of natural gas or oil. By far safer, to, just fracking, which is actually a miracle practically in what it's been able to release in terms of providing people with cheap, reliable energy. I mean, that's what we want. Energy is the master resource, and they are literally polluting people's minds about how we think about energy and how important it is.
Yeah, and they have to do this by suppression of free speech.
That's
John
right.
Stossel,
it's all working together,
who is a champion of free markets, who's a champion of liberty, is suing Facebook because of what they did to him. He hosted, along with the Heartland Institute, Stossel and Heartland co-hosted a forum on climate science. And we had scientists, professors at universities. We had advisors to presidential administrations. We had the top-notch scientific minds up there, and we invited the leading voices who believe in a climate crisis to participate. They wouldn't participate because they knew they'd get smoked. So we had the panel discussion anyway, and then Facebook refuses to allow anybody to share that video. YouTube refuses to allow that video to be posted. This is a type of suppression that they need to do in order to prevail on the issue, because they can't win in the battle of ideas. Now, when the Biden administration talks about the need for a Ministry of Truth and how, well, we need to fight disinformation, look, it's not like they can't have Jen Psaki or somebody in her small department going out there, looking up what she thinks the facts are and reporting them as they like. It's not like there isn't PolitiFact and the Washington Post that do their own twisted fact-checking aneway.
Oh, I've been fact-checked a number of times.
Yeah, but what they want is they want an official list of what can and can't be spoken, what should be censored, what must be censored, and then to say, well, this isn't government censorship, it's big tech doing it. We just told them what to censor. It's preposterous. It is the biggest threat to our freedom and liberty that I can recall experiencing in my lifetime. If we are going to have a ministry of truth telling us what we can and cannot say, the Soviet Union probably seems more like a free country compared to that. I mean, well, I guess it's the same thing. But
so how can we get a hold of your video that you did with John Stossel? How can we get that somewhere else?
So I believe.
Can I put it out through my network, through my email list? What can I do?
Yeah. So we have an embedded video on a web page for the Heartland Institute.
Okay.
So you have to know to go to our web page. You have to know to go and search for it because there's only so much we can put on the front page.
Sure.
We have to keep things up to date.
Sure.
So you basically have to know about it, but you're not going to know about it if you can't talk about it on Facebook, if you can't see it on YouTube. So that was a tremendously popular video. I forget the numbers. I believe it was well over 1 million views.
Well, we're going to highlight that in my weekly newsletter and put it out as a separate attachment. Yay, thanks you so much. So tell us more. I mean, we're going to wrap up this interview. It's been really informative. I appreciate you coming in, but tell us a little bit more about Heartland Institute and how people can connect with Heartland Institute. You're right here local, which is the glorious thing. I mean, you talk about world and national issues, but you are locally right here in our backyard, right here in the suburbs of Chicago.
We are.
And you have great events too.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity here. So the Heartland Institute, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy organization, and our mission is to discover, develop, and promote free market solutions to the problems that confront society. What we're most known for is, as you mentioned, the global warming debate. And it's interesting. People will say, well, why are you involved? It's a science issue. Well, what happened is when politicians tried to impose restrictions on our freedoms, on our freedom of choice of energy, expensive solutions that would increase electricity costs dramatically, we said, well, look, if we're frying the planet, I mean, you have to do what you have to do. It doesn't matter what it costs. We don't want to destroy the earth. On the other hand, we've seen this song and dance before with all these fake scares, especially fake environmental scares. Let's open up the hood and let's make sure that we're facing this crisis before we give in to all of these restrictions on our freedoms. And what we discovered, talking with scientists around the world, is that no, just like it has been the case with so many other things, the science just doesn't support the alarmism. So we're best known for that, and that's why we're involved on a quote
Here's
science
where I like
issue.
to remind people that it was hotter 1,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And we actually may be in a global cooling phase right now.
Right. And one thing I like to tell people, I say, if there's one thing to remember, if there is one piece of information to remember in this debate, it's this. You cannot have a global warming crisis if temperatures are unusually cool. For most of the period that human civilization has existed, temperatures are warmer than today. That's an undisputed fact. When we hear about the 8 hottest years on record, it's because they conveniently define the record as the past 100 years, not the 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 years that human civilization has existed. Well, 100 years ago, we were just emerging from the Little Ice Age. It was the coldest period since the last full ice age. It's a good thing temperatures warmed from the Little Ice Age, but you can't say the planet has a fever because we're no longer in the depths of the Little Ice Age. But at the Heartland Institute, we tackle that issue. We tackle healthcare. We fight for healthcare choice.
Yes.
We fight for school choice.
Yes.
We fight for sound fiscal and budget policies. We're involved in the ESG and tech debates. We're based in Arlington Heights. We have events at our office that are open to the public about once a month. So if you go to our website, heartland.org, you can find our latest events there. And we really try to focus, although our topics have sometimes international and almost always national implications, we try to also focus very much at state level issues and even local issues, because although we can talk about topics that are national in scope, the laws or the policies or the restrictions that are in place are largely at the state and local level. Look at the social restrictions in COVID.
I am wondering, have you been invited down to testify? Were you invited down to testify on Illinois' version of the Green New Deal, the CEJA Act that passed last fall? Were you invited to the table?
No, we weren't.
No, of course not. They don't. Okay, that's why we're having you
Well,
on.
it's a shame. It's a
It
shame.
is a shame. It's a shame. They've got expertise right in their backyard.
Jeannie, when you were in
and
the
they will
legislature, I
ignore
was
it.
invited down there.
I know. I
But
invited you down.
I know.
Yes.
And now, I guess
I know.
Republicans and Democrats alike
They
either aren't doing their
ignore.
homework or don't want to hear it. And hopefully it's just that they're not aware of the resources that we can provide. But we have, on our website, you can find information on not just global warming, but on energy policy, on environmental issues across the board. So if we're talking about the Green New Deal, we are the folks that are providing the best information to fight that.
Yep. Well, very good. Well, listeners, I think that was a treat. We will definitely try to have James back for another round on another topic. Stay tuned. A couple more segments coming up.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Welcome back to The Real Story with Jeanne Ives. In a continuation of using, actually, let's start that over again. I don't want to say I'm using. Welcome back to The Real Story with Jeanne Ives. As I told you before, I like to put real experts on about real important topics so that you guys hear about what's going on from people in the know. And so on this segment, we're going to talk with Bruno Behrend. He is a senior fellow for education policy at the Heartland Institute. I know last segment we also had James Taylor in, the president of the Heartland Institute. They are an incredible resource, as Mr. Taylor's explained. They're right here in our backyard in Arlington Heights. Well, Bruno's been associated with the Heartland Institute for a long time, and that's really kind of where I got to know him. When I became a policymaker, I started to invest in understanding policy from experts. So I naturally connected with Bruno on this. And now he's also a graduate. Bruno's a graduate of the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, where he earned his degree in finance. He earned a JD from Kent College of Law in 1990, and he's licensed to practice law in the state of Illinois. So, Bruno, you're joining us. We're going to talk about some stuff that's been happening in education. I'm going to pause right here, though, with a note from our sponsors. And these are sponsors that have sponsored our event on May 13th. It's the Dan Proft, John Cass, a dinner and discussion about everything Illinois. Is it time to turn Illinois upside down? I'm sure that Bruno would agree with me on that. But one of our sponsors is Net Motor Cars. You can find them at netmotorcars.com. These are the guys that make car buying so easy. They have on-the-spot financing from major banks. They have an inside climate-controlled 30,000 square foot indoor showroom, tons of sports cars, convertibles, and SUVs, and everything that you need to look the best out on the road. It's your one-stop shopping experience. Ask for Michael Colby. He's the general manager of netmotorcars.com. He'll personally take care of you. And another one of our corporate sponsors for that event on May 13th. And by the way, we're almost sold out. If any tickets are available, you can go to breakthrough-ideas.com and get some of the last tickets available. But another one of our corporate sponsors is Kai's Restaurant at 705 North Avenue in Glendale Heights. They're the trailblazing restaurant that defied Governor Pritzker's unlawful mandate and inspired hundreds of other Illinois businesses to stay open. They put up on their marquee, "We are Americans. We are free and open." Go to Kai's, the home of the best steak and seafood in Glendale Heights. From certified hand-cut Black Angus steaks to fresh seafood delivered daily, Kai's is committed to serving nothing but the best to their customers. So just a little intro to two of our very good corporate sponsors here for The Real Story with Jeanne Ives for our podcast and, of course, all the work that we do at Breakthrough Ideas. Bruno, you've been on the forefront of school issues for a long time. You've been in this fight forever. Are we moving the needle at all, or is it getting worse?
I don't think we are moving whoever the we is, if the we are the people who want education reform, I don't know that we are moving the needle. I think the needle is moving on its own based on what people are starting to see happening for the first time, like they're really looking at the issue. And I think a lot of this has to do with what has happened with COVID, the riots, and the way the media has all of a sudden we had a media that went from biased to literally just out and out lying to us right in front of us on a whole range of issues. So I think what's happening is that people who used to not care, it's like there were people who cared. I'm a conservative. I care about conservative things. Some people are liberal. They care about liberal things. And we've always had people who cared, and those people are about 50-50 of people who care. But now millions of people who didn't care are starting to find out what's being taught in their schools, and they're just shaking their heads. And I think, I don't know how many people in your audience are familiar with the term red pilled, but that's, the scene from Morpheus and the Matrix, where if you take the blue pill, you wake up in the morning and everything's normal. You take the red pill and you find out just how crazy things really are. And I'll give you a simple example. I've been telling people for the longest time, the schools are a cultural institution and they are actively undermining American culture on purpose. And people would look at me and say, well, you're just nuts, or you're wrong, or no, it can't be that bad. No, this is only one little thing that's happening. And now people are like, they're seeing what's really happening in their schools, and they're going, oh my gosh, the schools really are trying to undermine not just the culture, but parental control, parental consent, the things that parents care about, the schools don't care about. And so I think the needle is moving, and I want to say I think the people who are running our institutions are probably moving the needle, because they're moving so fast and so aggressively that people are waking up and saying, what the heck is going on here?
Well, we hope so. I mean, so it's one thing to go and complain to your school board, and there's plenty of reasons to complain, and it's not just all this wokeness and cultural issues that are happening, and and your kids literally are being indoctrinated in school. That is absolutely happening. But you also have a real lack in academic standards. I mean, kids they didn't just fall behind because of COVID. They've been falling behind for a while. So this gets more into it. I mean, but when you let's look at the cultural stuff first, and then I kind of want to talk about the academic and what's going on there as well. But I mean, Hinsdale Central, right here in the suburbs, furries, they had kids absolutely allowed to dress up as a furry creature at Hinsdale Central. Now, most people don't understand, but the sexual connotation behind furries is problematic. The idea that you think that you can be somebody that you're not, in terms of like you can actually be an animal. I mean, the fact that not every single teacher didn't stand up and revolt and say, what the hell's going on here is just amazing. Now, administration did eventually step in and say, you can't dress that way. Sorry. But the fact that it's even happened, it was even allowed for even 1 iota, 1 minute, forget it. Then you have pro-LGBT training, indoctrination at Bolingbrook Middle School, instructing teacher on how to be pro-LGBT. Instruction paid for by tax dollars. There you go. Here in Wheaton, I like to remind people, the kindergartner student brought home the transgender book, Jack Knocked Jackie. The parents open up her backpack, see that, and they're like, what is going on here? And then here's the latest thing, and we put this out on our newsletter here at Breakthrough Ideas. If you don't get our newsletter, go to breakthrough-ideas.com, sign up for our newsletter. It comes out weekly. It's a compilation of our podcasts, my Reveille, and other good information that we think that you should be aware of. But, they have this Illinois Youth Survey. And we got screenshots of some of the questions on the Illinois Youth Survey. But what's more disturbing than anything is the entrance to it, the beginning of it. It says, the Illinois Youth Survey is approved as an in-school survey only. Do not administer the survey during remote learning or ask students to complete the survey from home. Well, thank God that somebody screenshotted this, but also COVID had a lot of ability when they did Zoom lessons to wake parents up. I think you're right. I think parents are onto this. I think kids are onto this. I hope that there's a change. I just don't quite believe it yet.
Well, you see, so this might be, this might sound controversial. I don't know. I've thought for the longest time, and Jeanne, I haven't been in this fight a long time. I don't do a lot of legal work, but my one successful case was suing the state on the Constitutional Convention language, and my other successful case actually went into federal court, where we stopped the school district from stripping a seat from an election because they thought they might lose control of the board. And so I've been saying for the longest time, because I've gone through every iteration of this, try and control education from your school board, try and talk to your teacher, try and talk to the principal. I have some bad news for everybody listening. And that is, for the next 5, 10 election cycles, next 10 years, 15 years, there is no hope in gaining control of public education. There might be some places, maybe Rick DeSantis in Florida did something with his bill, maybe he didn't. the very best thing that people can do right now, and I know they're going to be crestfallen when they hear this, but the very best thing you can do right now relative to schools is to get your children out of it. There are online options, there are private options, there are homeschooling options. I know a large number of people in the suburbs don't like to hear this because they think that the suburban schools are so good.
Mm-hmm.
The suburban schools have a lot of money, and they have some highly qualified teachers who might still be qualified at teaching math or history. But the schools themselves are not interested in educating Americans the way the schools were interested in that in the 60s or in the 50s or in the 30s. The schools are interested in forming and reforming your children culturally. And I would recommend it to any parent. It's like, why would you send your kid to school for the small amount of quote unquote education they're getting, when every minute they're there, the teachers and the schools are literally trying to divorce your children from your family, and have them become more of a social creature created by the schools than a creature created by the family and the local culture and the people around them. They're very, very toxic, and that's not to say that there aren't some talented people in the schools, and that's not to say that there aren't some superintendents that actually want to really improve a tough school district or something like that. There are those people, but the system itself has decided to become actively anti-American foundational values, and that's why they're doing everything they can to undermine all foundational values. So just pull your kids out, try and homeschool, send them to a private school. And if enough people do that, then you're going to start seeing the schools wanting to revert to, when they lose enough people, when enough people are getting out, that's when they might start changing. But, especially in the suburbs, most of the people in the suburbs probably have no idea how easy it is to find online curriculum, maybe some homeschool options, some homeschool co-op options, where their children can actually get very well educated outside of the toxicity of the brick and mortar schools.
Well, I mean, it's easy for me to say. I'm going to be honest with you. But because my last child, the number 5, is graduating from high school this year. So feel like maybe we squeaked it out, right? And we've had our moments. I mean, her English teacher at Wheaton Warrenville South, and I tell people this openly, don't care, going to say the name of the school, sorry, Wheaton Warrenville South, Christian Wheaton, God's country, as some people like to refer to it as. The teacher sent around a getting to know you survey and asked, what are your pronouns? I'm like, nope, not doing that. I mean, I shut it down between her and that teacher, brand new teacher, by the way, immediately. But if kids don't tell their parents don't know what's happening. But this is happening everywhere. I don't care if you are in St. Charles. I don't care where you are. It's happening. They're showing the gingerbread person. They're showing, they've got, trans people belong posters on their doors. We showed that this week on our newsletter too. And then you have Evanston, right? Evanston takes it to a whole new level. This is Evanston Skokie School District, adopts a curriculum that teaches K through 3 students to break the binary of gender. Now, we've seen this coming. We know that they passed comprehensive sex ed, which includes teaching gender dysphoria issues at the kindergarten level on up. We know that because we've highlighted here on Breakthrough a number of times. Well, Evanston Skokie School District has now adopted a radical gender curriculum that teaches pre-kindergarten through 3rd grade students to celebrate the transgender flag, break the gender binary established by white colonizers, and experiment with neopronouns such as ze, zer, and tree. I mean, this is outrageous. They can't even teach them English correctly anymore. This is where we're going. And yet, here's the caveat. They're not educating the kids. You go to the Illinois State Board of report card for Evanston School District, and I'm reading straight from it right now as I do this podcast, Evanston CCSD 65, CCSD 6, academic progress. Only 35% of the kids do English and language arts at grade level. Only 37% can perform math at grade level. They are failing these kids even as they indoctrinate them with nonsense. And parents need to wake the hell up.
I guess, the hard part is that you can't even have a debate on educational attainment anymore. Back when I was working
No, because
full-time
that's
at the
racially
Heartland
charged
Institute,
too. You're picking on the poor minorities. No, I'm not. Actually, no, I'm not picking on poor minorities. I'm telling you, this is a problem.
yeah, and so they're not even concerned about that anymore. And they'd much rather have. And this is what I don't understand. I don't understand why they don't even want to have the education debate. Go ahead.
A plurality of students are white in Evanston School District. A plurality. Okay, so this academic issue isn't just like a black or Hispanic thing. Plurality. So you're looking at 46%, 42% of the people in students in that district are white, 23% black, 21% Hispanic, and they're not learning either.
Pretty amazing.
They're not learning either.
Well, and that's why I think so many people are starting to come around to, again, the needle is moving, and it's because I think a lot of blacks and Hispanics are saying, wait a minute, we know how much education means for our children to move ahead, and then they're starting to look at what's going on in their school, and it's like, wait a minute, you guys aren't even educating our children. So it's time for the reformers to step up and say, if you want your children to get educated, you have to take control over their education, and the way to do that is to demand new education opportunities through homeschooling, through charter schools, through school choice, through vouchers, where you need to demand that you take the money and that money follows the child to the education you want. And we need to have a mass exodus from woke education.
Absolutely. So I don't know how else to do that than to keep announcing or highlighting, exposing the stories like this that are going on. I mean, what else do we do? Because parents, I mean, think about this. In Evanston, 3 kids walk in kindergarten, only one of them walks out educated at grade level. But I don't think that the parents actually know that.
Well, and that's the hard part in terms of like each district is going to have its own thing. When you have some of the stories that come up in some of the suburban districts, whether it's the case in Virginia of the trans person who attacked somebody, and then you ended up with an entire governor's race revolving around the Democratic gubernatorial candidate saying parents shouldn't have any say in what's going on in schools. Then in Evanston, who knows how many people are getting awake to this issue. But I think the thing that we have to do is to highlight these kind of stories and then back it up with saying, look, you have to do 2 things simultaneously. Number one, you have to demand better education out of the place that they're getting education. And then, maybe you can have some change at the board level if enough people get angry. I mean, let's put it this way. If in hard left San Francisco County, where there literally are no conservatives, no right-wingers, no white supremacists in that locale, if those people are going to throw out a crazy school board to the tune of 70-30 vote, then if enough people get activated, you can have the same thing happen in places like Evanston. But it becomes a very difficult task to get that many people activated unless they can coalesce around a story or an event or a situation where all of a sudden they all become aware of it.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I think what needs to happen is you tie this radical gender ideology being put on K through 3rd graders along with failing test scores, and you begin the movement to take it apart. But you are fighting some fierce forces up in Evanston where they are all in to give reparations, and in fact have already started to give reparations to black residents. So I mean, you're dealing with it. That's a huge problem. What you do have to see is you have to see parents emptying out of that entire community, who actually get a clue. Look, I'm fine. You want to go to a woke school, go to woke school. But I want freedom of choice. I want choice for everybody.
Right. Well, and I think there's more and more information and data coming out in terms of studies that I guess if you wanted to make a political slogan out of these this data, you would just say woke makes you stupid. But I would, if I were going into Evanston and walking around or talking to somebody, I would say, look, this woke stuff is not educating your child. And if you're Black or Hispanic and you want to move forward in this culture, you can try to change the culture the way the woke people are doing it, but they're not being very successful. And as a matter of fact, they're fomenting a huge backlash. Some of that might be justified. Most of that, I think, is justified. Some of the things that comes with the backlash might not be justified. But woke isn't educating your children. It isn't making them more employable. It isn't giving them higher test scores. It's not giving them a better understanding of the science that they're going to need to learn, or the history that they're going to need to learn, or the cultural acclimation that they're going to need to be part of, to become part of the culture around them. All woke does is make you bitter, resentful, angry, and weird. And if you want to turn around and think your weirdness is going to give you some kind of an identity, future employers don't care about your identity. All the Chinese students and all the people in manufacturers in Vietnam and China and the Pacific Rim, they don't care about your woke identity. They just laugh at that kind of stuff. They want to know how much you know. Employers are going to want to know how much you know. And being bitter, resentful, angry, and woke isn't an employable feature.
No, not at all. So, I mean, I think it's unfortunate. It's taken, a few decades to get to this point. It's going to take, unfortunately, a couple decades to get out of this. Although I do rest hope in governors like DeSantis, who has basically, he's upending every system he can find and putting in great policy because he's got a really good legislature behind him, which gives it the force of law, so that he can actually do the right thing for people. I mean, that's what we need in Illinois. By the way, that's what we need in Illinois. You can't just send a conservative governor. You've got to give him a conservative legislature. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of issues. So more and more people are going to move for freedom, not just a tax rate. And they're going to move for choices, options, less government control, more freedom for their family. That's how I see it happening. It's thank God our founding fathers set up a laboratory of democracies so that people can see the results of policies from one state to another.
Well, and what I would love to see happen, and I've looked into this a bit. I used to help some people try to get charter schools started, and charter schools had some benefit in, like when you talk about like more normal times, like the 90s and 2000s, they had some benefits, and they could have a more independent school that did things their own way. And now that has been largely co-opted by the Democratic Party, essentially abandoning charter schools and going in and trying to get rid of them, even the ones that were actually working really effectively. Now, many of them, particularly here in Illinois, are no longer that effective, and they've become unionized. They've also gone the wrong direction. What a lot of parents could and should think about, and it would be really good for the reformers to start offering, consulting services or setup services, would be something to, like starting up a micro school or a homeschool co-op or something like that. Any group of caring parents who can find the right sources of information online, and there's, you can go to the internet and you can find a crazy woke curriculum, you can find a classical curriculum, you can find everything in between. And so it's all out there, and it doesn't have to be lockstep with any one ideology. It's just a place to find knowledge. You can do that, and I think many, many people listening should, if they even have a chance to do it, should toy with the idea of, what would happen if we just pulled our kids out of school for a year, maybe 20 or 30 of us, or 15 or 20 of us pulled our kids out of school for a year and tried to do a homeschool co-op of some sort and use some kind of physical location along with some kind of online support, and just to see how well people might be educated if they just walked away from the existing school system.
Absolutely. There's so many resources out there now to parent successfully, to educate successfully. and it doesn't take a public school to do it. And by the way, you should be very careful about some of the private school stuff too. There is issues going on there in terms of wokeness. Social emotional learning is getting pushed down children's throats in Catholic schools, for example. So, this should be. I say this is the year of the parent. Because parents deserve to have more control over everything that goes on in their home and with their children. So, Bruno, any final thoughts?
I think what we have to do, my final thought, I'll go back to what I said earlier. I think all of us who think this way have to become much more steeled and ready to get up in the face of the woke and the people who defend it, and just say no.
Mm-hmm.
You might not get invited to that next block party, but maybe on the other hand, you'll be shocked at how many people have come around to your way of thinking where you think that they didn't before. And we just have to stand up to this stuff and start getting really aggressive and say this isn't good for our children. What's good for our children is to get a good education and understand so they can understand the world around them and live in it, as opposed to be angry at it.
Terrific. Well, thank you again, Bruno Behrend. Thank you for joining us on The Real Story with Jeanne Ives. Putting
Thanks
real
for having
experts.
me.
Yep, you bet. Thank you. Take care. Have a great day. Welcome back to The Real Story with Jeanne Ives. Again, thank you to our sponsors for our May 13th event with John Cass and Dan Proft. We're nearly sold out, but we want to thank our corporate sponsors. First, Net Motors, netmotorcars.com. These guys make car buying easy, on-the-spot financing, everything inside a climate-controlled 30,000 square foot indoor showroom. Tons of sports cars, convertibles, and SUVs. Your one-stop shopping experience. Ask for Michael Colby, General Manager of netmotorcars.com. He'll personally take care of our supporters. Thank you. That's awesome. We appreciate being taken care of, especially. And then also, we want to thank Kai's Restaurant at 705 North Avenue in Glendale Heights, the ones that were the trailblazers when it came to standing up to Governor Pritzker and put out a sign and basically baited him saying, "We're Americans. We're Americans, Governor. We're free and we're open." And they stayed open the whole time, and people responded in force. Kai's is the best place to get steak and seafood in Glendale Heights. Certified hand-cut Black Angus steaks and fresh seafood delivered daily. Award-winning Kai's, always serving the best to their customers. I highly encourage you to check out their steak sliders or their French onion soup, which is delicious. I've had both of them. Can vouch for them. So in this last segment, I wanted to cover a couple other items. First of all, Mayorkas, he's the director of Homeland Security. I kind of touched on this with James Taylor. But the fact that they're actually coming up with their own disinformation governance board that will be part of the Department of Homeland Security should scare all of us. I mean, first of all, DHS can't do their current job. Let's take a little bit of a pause here, and let me remind you that the DHS director who was on a Sunday talk show just yesterday, he admitted to releasing 836,000 illegal immigrants into the U.S. in the last year and another 207,000 unaccompanied minors. He also admitted that an additional 200 to 400,000 illegals got away undetected. So the department that's supposed to protect us is not protecting us, and is now going to protect us against disinformation. I mean, what are we living in? Are we literally living in 1984? Are they really going to put out a ministry of truth, which is actually not a ministry of truth, but a ministry of falsehoods? Is that what we're looking at doing? I mean, it's actually quite frightening what they're doing. The problem here is that, Americans have many ways to ferret out the truth now. And our internet needs to be free and accessible without any sort of distortion coming from a government fact checker. That is outrageous. So it's no coincidence, though, no coincidence, in my opinion, that this disinformation board is announced following Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter and just months away from an election in which Democrats are expected to get what they deserve, which is a total rejection of their socialist destructive policies. So, wake up, people. I mean, if they can put something like this in place, if they even just having the thought of putting something like this in place should frighten everybody and should cause you to, talk to your Democrat leaders. Hey, if you're a Democrat and you think that this is okay, wow, oh wow. The first freedom is freedom of speech. And if we don't have freedom of speech, we might as well be China or Russia. How do you like that? Not good. Another thing I wanted to touch on is this other what's happening with Illinois farmers. And I just lost hold on just a moment. Here we go. Yep, the Center Square had a report out. They wrote this: Illinois farmers are speculating in the volatile global market. When Dennis Green was a young farmer starting out in southern Illinois in the 1970s, he did not give a lot of thought to the Soviet Union as a player in world agriculture, is how the article starts. Russia and Ukraine and some other countries were still part of the Soviet Union. In the 1970s, they could not raise enough wheat for their own people, Green told the Center Square. We would never have thought that a war like we have going on right now would be something that would have an impact on world markets. But Russia and Ukraine are large contributors to the world wheat market. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia this spring has rocked global markets, causing shortages, creating uncertainty, and driving up prices for U.S. wheat. So at harvest time in June, July, market watchers expect Illinois wheat prices will hit record highs. Prices have soared, and so have the costs of fertilizing U.S. crops. According to data from the Fertilizer Institute, Russia is the biggest exporter of fertilizers in the world, producing 23% of the ammonia exports, 14% of the urea exports, and 10% of processed phosphate exports, 21% of potash exports. Here's the other thing. Here's the other kicker I wanted you guys to be aware of. The article continues. Russia is also a major exporter of natural gas, which is used in the manufacture of nitrogen fertilizers. And what is the Pritzker administration doing? What did the Democrats sign on to, and Republicans? I like to remind people that Republicans signed on to this. They decided that we don't need to produce natural gas anymore in the state of Illinois. So even if we wanted to produce our own fertilizer plant, if we're going to roll back and get rid of fossil fuels, and particularly natural gas, then we'll have no ability to produce our own fertilizer, to grow our own crops, to feed the rest of the state, the country, and indeed the world. This is where we're headed. But I think it's the fact that most people don't know how things are produced. They just don't know what they don't know. So going on, Western sanctions on Russia have disrupted fertilizer shipments and increased shortages, driving input costs even higher than they were last fall. This does not bode well for the consumers, folks. They are where all of this price increase is going to rest. The final consumer is the one who's going to feel the most pain when it comes to buying a product after the inputs have gone through the roof. So should Illinois wheat farmers increase the amount of wheat they plant in the fall? Green said it is too soon for him to decide. The factor that, because he's got competing problems. One, he's got to pay more for the fertilizer. Is he going to get it back? How long will this war continue? He possibly can make it back because you're going to have higher wheat prices. What does he do? Well, he says the factor that will determine what happens there is what the price of wheat looks like come fall, Green said. After the corn and soybean crops are harvested, Illinois wheat is planted to overwinter in the same soil where the corn and soybeans were grown. The soft red winter wheat variety that is grown in Illinois is primarily sold to U.S. factories to be used to make cookies, pretzels, baked goods, and flatbreads. It is not used for bread and pasta. So that's where he's going. I mean, it's up in the air. What do they do? But, we're global consumers because we've got this natural alignment of where things can best be produced and cheapest produced. That's where you're going to get shipments in from. That's what having a sort of a capitalist global market is all about. Wherever labor is cheapest, or like China, or wherever things can be produced cheaper, you're going to be buying from those markets so that your consumers get the best price. But you know what? When those markets go awry and we start to become too dependent on critical resources, on foreign governments that have entanglements that we don't agree with, then that's where we need to be able to at least produce enough for our own country. And so that's how we stand. So just making you aware of it, I do not see this inflation being solved anytime soon when it comes to either energy prices or consumer prices. So that's all I have today for The Real Story with Jeanne Ives. Thanks for paying attention, and please sign up for my newsletter at breakthrough-ideas.com. Share this podcast with everybody that you know, and sign up for our YouTube channel as well. Thank you.